So this was a training that was run last week on providing strong values, purpose and direction for boys. So if you were unable to attend the session, you might glean some information from me talking over this presentation. So the aims of this session were to outline what this program is about, to offer and share with you some working examples using a comparative base, which we'll talk about in a bit, and also to create a collaborative network for development of the program in the future. But also to share practice and talk about what has been successful in your context and what's been successful in mine, and ways in which we can further improve the program. So my name's Sam Challoner. I'm originally from London. This is my third year at Nord Anglia, where I currently am the head of year for year 4. Previously, I worked at Kellett and ESF schools as a supply teacher. And prior to Hong Kong, I worked in an inner London primary school, which had many challenging children, but in the context of this, boys in particular. And prior to becoming a teacher, I was a special constable working with the Metropolitan Police, which was also a very eye-opening experience there. So this slide we'll skip through as it doesn't have relevance here. So the Nightly Virtues Programme is a programme designed by the Jubilee Centre for Character and Virtues, and that's in conjunction with the University of Birmingham. And the idea of it is, with a literature base, we focus on different values which can be developed to make good global citizens, but in particular a good reference point for boys. And these are self-discipline, gratitude, humility, honesty, love, service, courage, and justice. And rather than me talking about it, there's a video here that you can watch, which will guide you through what the programme is all about.
It's a joy to be here today for the launch of the Center for Character and Values. It's probably been a centerpiece of my father's vision for what it means to be a part of any society, but especially a free society. I think not only did he care so much about gratitude, but he saw it as the glue that keeps civilization or people together. And that as a consequence, there might then arise a kind of a joint gratitude. That would be the greatest accomplishment we would hope would come from this.
The Nightly Virtues programme is a programme that's essentially built around this key idea of recognising the educational relevance of moral virtues and qualities of character that can be associated with classical notions of knightly virtues. So the programme has 8 virtues: humility, honesty, love, service, courage, justice, self-discipline, and gratitude. And what this programme seeks to do for 9 to 11-year-olds is come up with an interpretation of those moral virtues and qualities of character that they're able to understand. The Nightly Virtues programme needed to be applied within 2 schools that acted as our pilots. And what we wanted to do was to choose 2 contrasting schools to recognise the diversity of school context that we have within England. And so the first pilot school, Ilam Church of England Primary School, was in a very rural location within Derbyshire. And the second pilot school, at St Bridget's Roman Catholic Primary School, was in a much more urban context, based within the city of Birmingham. The next challenge for the team from the Jubilee Centre for Character and Values at the University of Birmingham was to identify a series of narratives that would be perfect for animating these virtues and providing the springboard for these pupils to critically consider these virtues for their own lives. And so we have within the programme a range of classic tales. The first of these is taken from the fantastic legend of King Arthur, and it's the tale of Gareth and Lynette. The second story is El Cid, a historical Spanish knight from the 11th century. The third is one of the all-time greatest literary classics, and it's Don Quixote. The fourth story is from William Shakespeare, The Merchant of Venice. So the Nightly Virtues programme recognises the power of storytelling as a fantastic way of engaging pupils creatively and imaginatively in thinking about issues of virtue and qualities of character. And what we've recognised within the programme to be a key element is the power of the teachers telling the stories to the children, and the children having the chance to listen with each other. What's been brilliant to see has been the teachers' skill and capacity to be able to not only tell these stories, but to tease out from the stories fantastic moments of engagement with issues of virtue.
I like all the stories. All the different characters were really brave in their own ways, and they all inspired me really. I liked the one with Gareth and Lynette because Gareth was really honest and very patient. Where Gareth kept on fighting the three knights. When he was fighting them, he didn't give up. He just kept on going on.
And what did that teach you?
To not be afraid of what events will be coming at you. The Don Quixote one, because everyone thought he was crazy, and he was a bit crazy, but then he got nice in the end.
Don Quixote, he showed lots of courage and lots of imagination.
I think we're really keen to capture children's perceptions of who they aspire to be and who influence them, but also giving them a framework and looking at inspirational figures in the past that maybe they could identify with and help them to reflect and think about their own lives.
To see how some of the children who had just not had any exposure to these kind of narratives before, how they responded and really got involved and sucked into these stories, and just to see the sense of wonder, it was just marvellous.
I'm really glad that I've taken part in it. I feel that it's had a massive positive impact on the children. It's been very nice to have an opportunity to be able to introduce the children to a wide range of literature whilst looking from a values perspective at the same time. Lots of our children don't get exposed to those sorts of narratives, be it either not at home or just we don't get an opportunity to do it in the curriculum. But when you're preparing them for a world outside of the education system, they need skills, values and an understanding and appreciation for far more than just a basic education.
Well, I've got a very feisty, already strong-minded group of children who already have lots of ideas about the world, and that has come through. They've responded really well. They've engaged with the virtues, they've had their own ideas, they've brought in new virtues that I might not have included, like loyalty, and they've got their own opinions about it. I think they've really learned something and used it themselves.
They were able to pick up, obviously, and relate which were the key values, and then be able to relate them very easily to the text with different characters, often drawing on key values that I hadn't even anticipated that they would.
And I love the learning journals. I think they have taken ownership of those learning journals. They've really taken them seriously. They put serious things in them, and they really have made them a part of what they're learning.
They're very aware of things in life that they know that they should be thankful for. We do a lot of work about children who are less fortunate than ourselves. They're very reflective on it.
The most transformative thing to happen is for young people to engage with values, to critically engage with values, and then to decide themselves what kind of person they want to be and how they're going to form their character. And I think that having done this programme, it will be much easier to come back to that learning in real life. If an incident happens in the playground, or if somebody feels something is unjust in class, then using that framework of virtues that they've looked at would help them discuss it, and it would give them the foundation to do that.
What we're really hoping is that the legacy of this programme will be a generation of children that have the language of virtue embedded within their worldview. And what we're also hoping is that there will be, from this programme, a renewed interest and engagement with classical tales of old that we all can see have timeless virtues and important moral decisions and dilemmas for us to learn through engaging with.
It would probably teach me how to act around people and be a different person to probably how I would have been without learning about virtues.
We'll leave it there. I think the main point from that last slide is that the idea of this programme is to teach people about how to act and behave. And as I said, the context at which I used this in was to do with boys. And the first one was a trial in a London state school, and then the second example was in an international private school, which is my current setting. And then one of the main things that you need to think about is adapting the programme for the need of your group. So some of these themes might be a bit more relevant, some may not be so relevant, and you need to adapt the tasks and activities to where you see fit. So much of my classroom practice is based on the research from this, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail later on. And what I'd like to do is provide you some working examples and a little bit of data to support the success of this approach. So if you use self-discipline as our first virtue or value, in which the story of Gareth and Lynette is used as a spine for the value here. So I've operated this course or program on a kind of boys club context. So I've selected groups of boys in both settings in London and this setting, based on those who could benefit from having a bit more values-based structure in their lives. And then within that, some of these stories need to be adapted and tapered according to need of that group. Within the group of boys, the demographic is such where within that there's a mixture of boys who potentially are good examples, who display examples of being virtuous or being having good, strong values bases from which the other children can work from. So the story of Lynette, with the handouts that come along with this this program, the story of Gareth and Lynette is one which displays self-discipline quite strongly. So in the group, I've spoken about the story and the themes that come out of it, and then part of that, we've also looked at ways in which this can feature practically within groups. So one child in my current context currently has certain self-discipline issues with contributing in class, in which he shouts out a lot. So things like the use of these tickets, in which he can use them as a way of maintaining and managing his self-discipline. There's various other games you can do with cones and cubes, which you can then build into your classroom practice as well. So the first, I guess, weekly theme would be self-discipline, and then it's about following up with your children and being quite rigid in your structure in which you implement them in your classroom and across the school, to give these boys a clear idea and direction of what's expected from them. So another important part of the programme generally is the way in which you engage with parents, and some of the paperwork that goes home with these children is to do with tasks which can display good self-discipline at home. And this child in particular showed good self-discipline, in which he took up some Muay Thai boxing, and the parents shared was shared what we did in school, and then looked at which ways in which self-discipline could be displayed at home, and this was one example of that child, and it's quite important for them for the boys in particular to have that narrative which is shared in school and at home. So the structure of the course itself is over weekly themes, which are then spoken about and developed on each week, and a weekly group would meet and then recap the subsequent week on good practice in school and at home. So the story of the Merchant of Venice is another one which you can use as a literacy spine, and it's a good reference point, a good starting point, but again you might want to tailor these to the need of your group, and it's one that displays gratitude. And something that we did in school was during one of the weekly boys club meetings in which gratitude was our theme, the children were encouraged to make a collage, and this collage was based on things we were grateful for, and despite this quite shoddy artwork, on these bits of tissue paper, children wrote down things that they were grateful for, and during the group session they would then stick these on as letters, and you could put them up as an artwork. And during the process, it's important to verbalize and speak about what they were grateful for, so that we could share our gratitude in with each other. And this was then displayed and referred to throughout. And I asked the boys also to collect reflections in a personal diary, again, which is part of the paperwork that goes home, and this can be shared with parents at home. And again, we then reflected on this session and shared it with parents at home, and the feedback was generally very, very good from parents and children for across the course. Humility is quite a tricky one, and particularly I think in the context of what I found in Hong Kong, and the concept of being humble. And then again, this story was one that we used as a spine and referenced, but alongside the story, it's important, I think, to have a working example which is more relevant for the children. So in practice, we had these small cards, which one was a personal reflection card, which is this one here, and one was an example of someone in history or across time who has shown humility. And this was, for me, an example from Nelson Mandela, and then this was my example, which was then collected. So one of these would stay in school, and one of these would go home to be shared with parents. Again, making sure that dialogue between home and school was strong and clear. And then this was an example of which humility was shared with parents on in the subsequent week. So this boy had just hit the winning runs in a cricket match, and he needed 6 to win, and he managed to get it. And instead of running around celebrating, he went straight over to the opposition team and shook their hands, which showed great humility. And the parents shared this photo with me, and were quite pleased with, I guess, representation of good humility, of being humble, but also a slight change, a slight shift in values and attitude. So the next one would be honesty, and I think it's quite important when you're looking at these heroes and looking at these characters from these stories is having a mixture of both male and female role models. And for here we used Anne Frank and spoke about the story of Anne Frank. Also online, you'll find that these stories are tailored and managed for a group which is relevant for about 7 to 11-year-olds. So this story of honesty was one we spoke about, and then moving away from the narrative, we developed in one of our group sessions was this trust tree. And during the time, it was times in which we were perhaps not so honest, and we used the idea of mistakes, and the focus of this session was to normalise the language and of mistakes and rectification. So this trust tree was in the middle, and we developed an environment where language and mistakes was to be only shared within the group, so that it didn't leave the room. And each time a child was honest, they put a sticker on the tree, and then this went up as a display. So we found that when children were admitting to perhaps a time when they weren't so honest, and how maybe a time they put it right, they were able to then place a sticker on the tree. So the concept of trust was developed as well within the group. And we spoke about how it's important to be reflective and solve problems as individuals as well. And then from there, this tree was up and displayed, and only the boys in the group were able to relate to what these stars represented, and that was quite a nice kind of trust development. And that's another important thing when we're looking at the values. It's important that we don't just necessarily rely on the virtues and values that we're given. In fact, we question them sometimes, and we think there are times when you can move away from these values and still represent good knightly virtues. And also within that, the concept of trust came out of honesty as well. So you're not just structured to just these virtues. And then this was an example of an honesty buy-in from home. So you can have a quick read of this. And this is an email from a parent, which developed and provoked quite a nice conversation. So I'll give you 30 seconds just to read that. Okay, so from this, I shared this with the group and kept the boy's name confidential. And from here, it developed a really nice conversation that week on honesty, where boys were able to relate to this idea, and it kind of then began to normalise how people felt at home, and how this was not an uncommon thing. And I think they felt a bit of solitude and in that itself. So the concept of love, we use the story of Don Quixote to use as a reference point. And again, this one is quite tricky for many boys, particularly in the inner London State School context, where love itself is often in cultural backgrounds, not necessarily displayed in the same way. So it's quite a sensitive one to talk about, and actually can be quite difficult to work around. So you have to manipulate it based on what you see as your as relevant for your group. And in one context, we used it as a big collage and a big artwork which hung over the door, and children were asked to bring in things, pictures of things or examples of things that they could add to this collage, and it was a double-sided collage, or draw pictures or add to it to display things that they found that were relevant in the concept of love for them. And this was then hung over the door, and could often be seen and referred to and referenced to for love. But again, it depends on the context, and I think this works particularly well in the international school context. But in the boys' context of the inner London State School, it had to work in a slightly different way, and we spoke quite frankly about what love was. And at this point, it was quite important to engage with dads from outside of school to kind of give us as a reference point. And what we found in the inner London school was that the dad engagement was quite strong towards the later part of the course, as they could see the language that was being used at school and at home as being relevant. And it meant that we could actually engage with dads and get them in to school, and we could speak about things like love and what that meant, and it gave some of the boys a really clear structure and a clear context for the course itself. But again, that doesn't always work. You have to work it out depending on your group. And this was another example of shared practice at home, which I'll let you read. And I think this is a really nice correlation with a good amalgamation of kind of what we're trying to achieve in our group sessions, and how this can look at home in practice as well. Service is an interesting concept, and we use Joan of Arc as our story as a reference point, but and the service for your group might be very, very different from and how that looks in practice compared to how it looked with mine. And within our school context, the current setting, we use global goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, as a good reference point, particularly when we're looking at ways in which we can help in serving our world. So one of the things that I did with my group was, for the session, we went on canteen duty, and we took the mops and cloths and everything else from the cleaning department, and we took on that duty, and we went around our canteen and helped tidy up after each other. And something else which I found has been quite nice, and the boys really get on board with is at the end of the day, boys go around the class and they put up the chairs for the girls, and the girls have to say thank you, show gratitude for that, and being responsible for your environment is another something else that this group of boys have taken on particularly well. And this was then shared with me from a parent at a school party, or her son had decided that he wanted to do something for a local food bank, and this group of boys went away, and instead of a normal party you would necessarily think of, these children went and often sorted some food for a local food bank, which I thought was giving back and showing a good example of service. Courage, we use the story of Rosa Parks, again using a different role model, and the story of Rosa Parks is commonly known, and for some of our boys, they weren't aware of it, and particularly those from in the British context, the ethnic and minority groups. This was a really good example as a role model, and the story worked really well, in which we were able to cling on to the concept of courage. And I think this was used in practice through a variety of different texts, really, and speaking about courage and how courage can look, and within your classroom practice, using the concept of courage to make mistakes, and growth mindset, and courage to be adventurous, and courage to be different, as a real kind of linchpin or holding point for your classroom practice, and that this can come through quite in many different ways, and as I'll talk about in a minute, these are displayed around the classroom. Also, in collaboration with one of our MIT projects, you can use courage cards to reward children for showing courage in classroom practice, but also within your group sessions. And over the course of the week, you can be rewarded for collecting the biggest variety of different courage cards. And this is a concept developed by MIT, and then kind of appropriated by myself and developed. And some of these will hold more relevance to your classroom than others, and it's just building in what you see as best fit. And then something that's particularly relevant for our Year 4 curriculum at the moment, we're looking at the story of Robin Hood and this concept of justice. Again, using the story as a holding point, but then developing it where needed. And then within that, some P4C and PSHC lessons have been developed where you speak of good versus evil, and this develops good speaking and listening skills, and can be a nice starting point for structured debate. And then, yeah, it's just going back to this idea of justice, and did Robin Hood receive, I guess, justice in stealing from the rich and giving to the poor, or was he in fact good in doing that? Was he in fact evil? And it's just quite a nice talking point you can build on. And this was one of the tasks in practice in which the boys displayed justice through problem solving, and you gave them a variety of different sweets or treats or prizes or whatever it might be, and you asked the boys to sort it out themselves. And they and you could hear them discuss what they saw as being just and what they saw as being unjust. And I then regrouped these and gave them some more to others and some fewer to others, and we spoke about, is that just, is that fair, is that appropriate, and it was quite a nice conversation that was developed with the boys. So some fairly botched data, but based on over the course of a year, the 15 boys in the current school context, I used their writing data and then analysed it from the year 2018 to the subsequent year 2019 and looked at the progress, and this is based on their GL scores. So this shows progress in their English and in their writing, particularly. Again, this is not down to the Nightly Virtues programme, but I think using a variety of different literature to hang on to can I'd like to think has broadened the boys' general literature understanding and literate kind of appreciation. And then, based on the London State School, it was a group of 16 boys showing the different contexts. 33% were free school meals, so underprivileged children, and from their Key Stage 1 to Key Stage 2 data, they showed 1.5 degrees of progress, and as a group it was 1.1. Again, not laying this down solely accountable to the course, but I feel it gives them an enriched kind of approach and an enriched vocabulary and an enriched attitude towards writing. So I think the biggest thing is whatever or however you develop this course, and I think the amount of material online that you can access is really important. Whatever you do, it's essential that you have a very clear values-based classroom. So whether it's in a small groups context like I've done previously, where I've tried to engage parents from outside of school, or I've tried to engage our male community with both dads and boys, it's important to have these values and virtues, whatever they work for you, resonant, clear, presented, accessible for your group. And whether it's through mantras, or whether it's through values, or whether it's through virtues, whatever you want to phrase them, it's incredibly important you have a structure and something that you abide to and you stick to for your classroom. And I've used this in a context of males and boys, and I would be really interested to see how it could work in the context of females and girls. And I think from my experience, there's a few things that need to be really thought of carefully, and that's how it will look with your group. So whether it's weekly sessions in which you refer to these virtues, whether it's whole class teaching, or whether it's in a very smaller context with just a few children. Whatever you do, it needs to have constant reference of the values, and you need to live and die by them. So if this program doesn't fit for you in your classroom, then it won't be successful. Whereas I think from my perspective, where I like to think my classrooms have got very clear values, very clear structures, very clear attitudes to personal and development, and I like to think that comes through in what I deliver, and therefore I'm developing attitudes in people. So I'd be interested to hear what you think of this, firstly, whether it would work in your class, if you have any further questions, and how we can work together to make this programme better for all parties. But please feel free to email me, check online at the Nightly Virtues from the Jubilee Centre. I've got handouts if you wanted me to post them to you. Just get in touch. There's loads and loads of resources out there to be shared, and this is a really great approach to classroom teaching that can really develop our children. So, yep, get in touch, and thanks for watching.